This is our moment. This is our time.
Haven't we heard this somewhere before?
This is our time.
It's not hard to understand why people around the world are so critical of their governments.
Where did you find these peckerwoods?
And it's real easy to understand how so many of you are tempted to give up on your interest in politics because you think that your patriotism just doesn't matter anymore.
I call that bold talk for a one-eyed fat man.
What you need is a little food for thought and a chance to make up your own mind.
Okay, let's make this quick. I got a hot dog in the microwave.
So, buckle up and get ready to hear some opinions and observations that you won't find in the mainstream media, which are brought to you from people here in the United States and from around the world.
Watch your language, bud. We're on the air.
I'm Justin Oldham, and you are listening to the Politics and Patriotism Show here on the Stitcher Smart Radio Network. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another political edition of the Politics and Patriotism Show. The Democratic and Republican national nominating conventions have wrapped up once and for all, in spite of what Hurricane Isaac had to say about the whole thing. The parties have their nominees, their platforms are locked in. We're down to approximately 58 days remaining in the presidential contest. Many Americans are convinced that that's 59 days too long. They're ready to get this thing over and done with. So it seems only fair that we should wrap this whole thing up with a bit of post-election commentary, post-convention commentary. Even I've got political fatigue right now. So today I would like to talk with show contributor Don White, who's down in sunny Jacksonville, Florida. I'm up here in Anchorage, Alaska, and the sun hasn't even come up yet, Don. I still have to wait another 15 and a half minutes to see daylight.
Well, in the land, Florida's called the Sunshine State for a good reason. I'm looking out my window. It's bright sunshine. It's 79 degrees, going to 86 today, and partly cloudy later on. So actually, I'm happy to be here and glad to hear from you. And sorry the sun is so slow in your part of the world.
Oh, that's what happens. This is the time of year when the daylight gets less and less and less. And 2 weeks from now, we'll be on the downhill side of 12 hours a day. So after that, if I blink, I'm going to miss daylight. So now, speaking of missing daylight, holy cow. Government has never been so unpopular in my lifetime. We now face a situation in which Congress has just a 10% approval rating. And I saw something on C-SPAN the other day which actually made me laugh. A pollster was talking about the way they compute the numbers for congressional popularity, and apparently the way their math works, the numbers pretty much bottom out at 9 or 9.0. Anything below that is just theoretical guesswork. That's quite the indicator when you're so unpopular that your unpopularity cannot be measured anymore.
I haven't heard that particular point, but I understand what you're talking about. It's something to do with the formulas that they utilize, and the formulas are most accurate in the middle and least accurate at the extremes. So I would say this. Actually, I do believe that the Congress reflects the will of the people. And it just so happens that the people are the ones that are divided, but the division is most apparent in Congress. The confusion arises when the average person faces a difficulty himself on a one-on-one basis. They usually negotiate with whoever they're dealing with and reach a compromise. But the congressional persons who are the chosen representatives are not in that position. I hear it all day long. Everybody wants Congress to compromise. Well, these people really are. They're facing career choices if they want to compromise, because they got elected on a certain proposition, and that proposition doesn't offer much leeway. And if they give it up, then they may have to go out and look for a job and work for a living for a change.
And how tragic that would be, to be sure. Now, as I look at the situation now, the candidates are locked in, the platforms are locked in. We have before us two very stark choices, as I knew it would be. And looking at the situation now, I can't help but say something that I said all the way back in 2008. Even before Barack Obama took office, it was obvious to me that he was going to be the next president. And I said back then to you that the economy would be the decider in this case. It's a question of economics more than anything else. The political parties themselves can say whatever they want. They can craft whatever message they want. But because of the slowly deteriorating situation that we find ourselves in, ultimately this comes down to people voting with their wallets. And, the most recent unemployment figures came out, and for the fourth time in a row, the government had to admit that their numbers are somewhat jiggered because they cannot keep accurate track of the total number of people who have given up looking for work. And I know people who are in this position. They were, these are educated people. They have college degrees. And some of them have been out of work for more than 3 years, and they have just flat out given up. Some of the folks I know they held off for as long as possible. They ate through their savings. They were so prideful that they spent every last dime they had before they went on the social welfare rolls. And now they're just so grumped out about the whole thing. There's just their attitude is really bitter. Fine, I'm just going to stay here. And those people, without exception, hesitation, or reservation, have made it quite clear to me that they are not voting for President Obama. And I find this to be interesting because a lot of political pundits earlier in the year, back around the month of April, were saying that this election will be a referendum on Barack Obama. And even then I said, no, it'll be a referendum on the economy more than anything else. So with that in mind, I'm going to get off my soapbox and give you an opportunity to make your own point here.
Well, thank you. And what you say, I confirm that you did say this in 2008, and I've always admired your ability to look ahead. I'm so partisan, you see, that it's very difficult for me to look ahead. I was encouraged this morning when I noticed in one of the news blurbs that for the first time in 4 months, President Obama has out fundraised Mr. Romney. And so I take a lot of comfort in that because it tells me that the people who really are in the know, that is the people who have lots of money, it tells me that the big guys are looking back over and seeing Obama out front because they put their money on the winner. They don't want to put their money on the loser. So
now hold on a second here. I've seen the same numbers. Be honest with us now and tell everybody what the fundraising numbers are, because right now Barack Obama's out in front by pocket change.
Well, that's true, but it's better to be in front by pocket change than to be behind. And I still say that that's the same encouraging thing because for the last 3 months before this one, Romney had out fundraised Obama, which is a bad sign from my point of view. But moving on, you talk about the economy.
Now hold on, we got to get. I wanted specifics. You're not going to mention them, so I'm going to mention them. In the last month, the Romney campaign raised $112 million, and a lot of that was from small donors. And the Obama campaign raised $114 million, which was also from a lot of small donors. So President Obama holds a $2 million lead, which gives him about 15 seconds worth of additional airtime in the TV market of his choice. So that dollar figure really is not all that big. And the thing that concerns me about this is that, as you say, I think the smart money is evenly divided at this point. And if they are that divided and the electorate is that divided, it tells me that the Supreme Court may want to make sure, and they may want to renew their parking passes here because they may be going back to work sooner than they think.
Well, thank you for straightening out the numbers there. And of course, those are correct. But now I want to move on because that's only a temporary thing. Next month we'll get the report, and then the next month we'll get that same report. But the important thing is, really and truly, I hear all kinds of economists who are supposedly nonpartisan or neutral who say that this is the worst calamity, economic calamity, since the Great Depression. And many people talk about recovery taking 4 or 5 more years from today. And this is because of a lot of reasons, not just one single reason. And many of these causes are beyond the control of the American government or the person who's in charge of the American government. I noticed also today that the stock market declined because of the reports from China that were very disappointing. That is, their exports only rose about 2% when they were expected to rise traditionally 5 or 6%. So China is in the same kind of economic doldrums that we are in, being down from 10% annual growth rate down to 2 or 3%, which for them is not good because they have only 300 million of their people elevated to a good economic status. They've got 1 billion people yet to go. They have a lot of work to do in China. India, of course, is far behind China as far as its individual GDP is concerned. So what I'm saying is this. And of course, we don't want to forget the European Union, 27 countries in Europe, and the Eurozone, which is 17 countries that use a common currency. Although right now, it appears that we're going to get past the immediate crisis in Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Italy, that nevertheless there is a disconnect in the Eurozone, which is not...
Now, hold on a minute here. How do you figure that they're going to get past this problem in Europe? Because just this last week, the president of the European Bank, Draghi, he says that all they're going to do is they're going to plug in the printing presses and leave them on for the next 10,000 years. And all that tells me is that we're in for hyperinflation that will make Weimar Germany look pleasant by comparison. And I have been telling you for the last 2 years that just as soon as the Europeans start hyperinflating, within 12 months, we're in the same boat. And that only has one outcome. The balloon will eventually pop.
Well, I know you said that, and I don't agree with that. The fact is, of course, that we gave up the gold standard, which is what underlies those complaints about hyperinflation. We gave up the gold standard in 1933 for one very simple reason. There's not enough gold to go around. So we have to use paper, and we're going to be using paper from now on. Of course, we want to use paper intelligently. And intelligently, let me say this. As long as inflation is less than productivity increases, you don't have to worry about the money supply. Obviously, if you put more money into circulation, then your productivity rise justifies, then you are inflating the economy. I don't know what the Europeans are going to do. I'm concerned that they get us past November the 6th. If we get past November the 6th without a crash in Europe, then the election will be over, and we'll deal with all these things that we cannot deal with, no matter how much we want to argue about it. They cannot be dealt with until after November the 6th. And that includes the whole world, because America is still 20% of the world's domestic GDP. We're still 20%. We're the big engine that pulls the train.
Okay, well, with that in mind, the candidates are out there. They're locked in. Everybody's got their choice. And as I look at what goes on, I'm not sure that it matters who's in charge, because I think the crash comes on the next presidential watch cycle. I think it'll come within that 4-year period. And right now, the only thing that I feel any certainty towards is that if Barack Obama gets a second term, he's going to put his foot on the gas. He's going to spend more money on social programs, and all that does is make the crash happen faster. If Mitt Romney gets into office, he's going to take his foot off the gas, and all that does is make the crash happen a little slower. But either way, it happens in the same 4-year window, and so all I can say as a citizen is I don't envy either one of these men the task of having to guide the ship of state through those turbulent waters, and as a historian, I feel sorry for either man who's going to have his his name put in the history books as being associated with this failure, which has been 7 decades in coming. Everybody knows this thing is coming. This is going to happen. But dumb, stupid politics is going to force it to happen when it didn't need to happen in the first place.
Well, didn't need to happen in the first place. I think you may be alluding to such socially valuable programs as the Social Security program, where when a person gets too old to work, instead of letting him go off in the woods somewhere and die peacefully, like the Inuits send them out on an iceberg, the fact is we have a system in place where we use generational exchanges. We work when we are able to work, take care of the children. When the children get old and we can't work, they take care of the adults.
You know, the post office has one thing in common with Social Security. If the Congress had left it alone, both of these institutions would have a hell of a lot more money than they do today, and they might not be in fiscal financial trouble at all. Now, in the case of Social Security, this generational exchange that you are referring to is, in my opinion, this is an involuntary contract that the old are forcing upon the young. But having said that, if the Social Security Trust Fund had been left alone and had been allowed to mature, there's a lot of university eggheads out there who crunch the numbers and they swear up, down, left, right, middle, and center that we wouldn't be having this conversation today. But unfortunately, our politicians have not yet met a fund that they did not enjoy raiding, and so here we are.
This program is brought to you by ShadowFusionBooks.com.
The government is not comparable to any other institution. It's not comparable to the family budget. Private enterprise has nothing similar to the government.
Well, okay, elaborate on that. What makes the federal government so special that they don't have to mind their P's and Q's like the rest of us?
You're mixing metaphors there, but anyway, P's and Q's is not the issue. The issue is the government actually determines what kind of currency we're going to have. The government decides how much of it we're going to have, and the government decides what rate of interest you're going to pay on it. And so
okay, let me be more precise then, for the sake of argument. I have to live within my means. Why doesn't my government have to live within its means?
I'm trying to explain that because they don't have the same problems that you have. They are the ones that make all of this thing work. It's like the great framework in which there's a lot of little machines going. And so you have to get off this idea that the government is a business. It doesn't have to make a profit. In fact, the government never makes a profit. Government is a service industry. It's not a profit industry. And people get these all confused. Now, I don't mean to say that the government, if it's ill run, wouldn't cause a Weimar Republic meltdown. So we don't want to get into that kind of thing. But we're smart enough now to avoid that. But the problem we face is the public is confused because some people keep wanting to say, oh, you've got to be in the black. You've got to be in the black. Well, I've tried to explain to everyone, if the government takes in more money than it spends, that's taking money out of the economy, and that's known as deflation. If the government spends more money than it takes in, that's adding money, which means that's inflation. And I'm telling you that inflation is the best way to go when you have the only two choices, as long as you keep inflation less than productivity rate increase. And that's what I call monetizing the debt. You never pay off the debt, but the debt constantly becomes a smaller and smaller fraction of your economy. And so you have to have a different concept if you're going to work in the 21st century.
And I think that this is fundamentally part of the problem that Barack Obama faces, is that he is trying to sell people on his vision of the new social contract. and he's having a hard time making the sale simply because the average person out there, being a checkbook mathematician, says, hey, hold on, wait a minute, I'm not sure I'm so willing to mortgage future generations because I, after all, have to live within my means, and whether Don thinks it's a good idea or not, I would like my government to have some of the same morals and ethics that I do, so I want my government to live within its means. And the thing I find so fascinating here is that as I talk to Democrats here in town, there's a lot of people, huge number of people that were altogether for this president in 2008. They liked the idea of voting in the first black president because of what this would do for us socially, but now they have such terrible buyer's remorse, and they have a hard time separating they have a hard time separating their social thinking from their economic thinking. But ultimately, the longer we talk about it, the more it goes away from the social thinking and it gets down to the economic thinking. I mean, there are several people that I'm thinking of right now who are they are bleeding heart liberals in the extreme, and now they're talking about their own children's future. These are, their kids right now are still toddlers, and they're imagining what their social obligations are going to be in the future, and it unsettles them terribly. And now they're not going to change party affiliation. They're not going to run over and suddenly switch their D's to R's. But all of these people are talking seriously about about these issues, and I'm not sure that when the time comes that when they get in the voting booth and they're by themselves, they might just vote for Mitt Romney just because of their economic concerns. So I'm curious to know what you would suggest that the Democrats do in order to get around this, because this is the first time in my life that I have ever seen a nation suffer from guilt that was motivated by economic factors. I've seen this country suffer from social guilt. I mean, you've got a few decades on me, so you remember the 1960s better than I do, but I would characterize the decade of the 1970s as being hip deep in social guilt for a number of things, and I was politically aware at that time, and I'm starting to see a lot of the same indicators again there. So now that I've given you a moment to think about this, what do you got to say?
I'm going to say it's going to be a hard task, and that it's correct. It has to be explained sufficiently well to people that they're willing to do what is required to be done. You see, the real problem, the underlying problem, is that we have social inertia. And that is, it's hard for people to remember things that are not pleasant to remember. Before 1935, when Social Security was first adopted, before 1935, older people traditionally lived with their families. They had larger families. My father had 9 brothers and sisters. And my grandfather came to live with us for 2 or 3 months. Then he went somewhere else to live, another place to live, and so on. Well, this was done because that was necessity. They didn't have the adequate funding to support themselves. So Social Security replaced that, and it's given 30 or 40 million Americans the opportunity to live on their own. Now, this means that the younger generation is trading having their parents living in their household. They're trading that for paying 6.2% of their income into the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, that's a generational change. I mean, in other words, we take money from A and give it to B. And it's done because A really likes it better that way. The same thing came along later in 1965, when we introduced Medicare. Old people were dying because they couldn't afford medical care. So we invented a system whereby they can get medical care. And I have Medicare, and I can tell you it's the best thing America ever did. I go to the doctor when I need to. I can choose who I want to go to. I can go where I want to go. And with my insurance, it's paid for. I don't pay hardly anything unless you overlook that I have to pay $99 a month from my Social Security check. They take out $99 before they send the check to me. Also, I pay $176 a month to a supplemental insurance company So I'm actually paying $266 a month out of my $1,600 a month. I'm paying $266 for insurance. But I play like it doesn't cost me anything because I live within my means. So these are the things. But if I didn't have that, those two different plans, if I didn't pay when I was working, I paid 1.45% into Medicare. My employer matched it, 2.9%. When I retired, I quit paying that 1.45. Now I've got a policy. It's paid up for the rest of my life, Part A. Now, these are the things that we've done, which are cross-generational. The people who pay in today pay for me. Next 30 years from now, the people who are paying them, the children you're supposedly worrying about, which you really don't, you didn't worry about them when the Republicans accumulated $10 trillion worth of debt. You didn't say a word. So I'm not thinking that you're really too serious about debt. It's only black Democrat debt that worries people. But getting back, and I'll finish here to say that I think everyone will agree we're no longer an agricultural economy. We cannot feed ourselves. Somebody has to do it. You can't barter your way through life. You've got to have money. That's why, even though I hate banks, you got to have banks. If they go bad, you got to replace them. So there's certain systems that we live with in 2012 that we have to accommodate ourselves to, and we can't daydream about 1940 and 1950.
I don't really think there's a lot of daydreaming going on here. I think that we are having a crisis of ethics more than anything else. And one of the things I find so fascinating about this is the fact that there are so many arguments along these lines that the Republicans could be making, which they are not making. I would have to say that this campaign season reminds me a lot of what happened with Bob Dole. There were so many openings, there were so many cogent arguments to be made, and the openings were bypassed, and the available arguments were simply not used. And in spite of the rather ham-handed nature of the Romney campaign, I am really surprised at the way the electorate is reacting here. And I got to say, I'm surprised in a positive way, because I didn't actually think that our society was capable of reaching these kind of conclusions anymore. I thought we were so addicted to the whole nanny state thing that these kind of discussions that I related earlier here, I thought that they just wouldn't happen, but now they are. And it's interesting to me to see how the economy itself is being more of an influence on this sitting president's future than the person who is running to oppose him. And as I try to wrap up my remarks here, I'm searching for a phrase which eludes me, but I come back to the point here. People are gonna vote their wallets, and it's altogether feasible that if the economy remains this bad, if it gets even a few grains worse, that Barack Obama's out of a job.
That could happen. There's no doubt about that. I think, though, that a good case has been made by non-political speakers that the economy is flattened out. It's not getting worse, contrary to what Paul Ryan says. The economy is not getting worse. It's stabilized, and it's going to take time. Everybody who talks non-politically says it's going to take time for the economy to recuperate, because we've made some basic changes. We're fundamentally going away from a manufacturing economy into a service economy.
Yeah, Don, but every time I hear stuff like this, what I do, I flash back to 1988, and what I'm starting to be concerned that we're about to do what the Japanese have done. The Japanese have been in a total dead calm for the last 22 years. And when I hear these people talking about another 5 years of recovery, I would like to point out that back in 2005 they said another 5. And I'll bet you money right now, hell, I'll bet you a cup of coffee right now this very second. In 2015, they're going to say another 5 just because the trend is looking like a prolonged recovery. This is, a lot of what you say is true. Our economy has changed. We are in a post-industrial world, but we are still using a lot of antiquated business models. And the old school 20th century thinking leads us down what I think is a false path here. We are looking at indicators which we no longer understand how to read. Now, as we come into the final few minutes of the program, I want to summarize my thinking as a citizen. I'm looking at the world through the lens of my own wallet here. In recent years, especially over the last 24 months, my grocery bill has gone out of sight, and I am dull as dirt, man. I buy the same thing every single week. I'm so predictable, I don't even have to memorize the grocery list. It's muscle memory anymore. And I have, in the last 10 months in particular, I've cut back on so many luxuries simply because the money's not there, and yet the government's telling me there is no inflation, there is no inflation, there is no inflation. Why the hell do I go to the store and pay 4 and 5 times what I used to for half as many groceries if there is no inflation? And that really seriously colors my thinking. So when I hear a sitting president tell me more social spending, I want to know, how do we afford it? And when I find Democrats who are having the same conversations among themselves and with me over the dinner table, and they're saying the same things I just said to you, that tells me that the situation is much worse than our leaders claim it is.
Well, I hope it's not. On the inflation amount, don't forget there are 30 items that are in the Bureau of Labor Statistics grocery basket that they use to calculate the rate of inflation.
And I understand that, Don, but we've only got half an hour, so please wrap up.
Okay. Well, I think it's going to be continuing as it is right now. If we don't have a war with Israel and Iran, or if the EU can hold up until November the 6th, I believe that Obama will be reelected.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you like what you heard, or if you didn't like what you heard, you can still find us online at politicsandpatriotism.com. I invite you to correspond with me or Don. Just click on the contributors button, scroll down, find our email address, give it another click, and start typing. We'll get back to you just as soon as we can. So on behalf of everyone here at the show, thank you for your time and have a good day.